One of the funniest things about Yu-Gi-Oh cards in the anime versus real life is how different the card effects are of the big anime boss archetypes when they're printed for the actual card game. In the anime, the final villain of an arc usually has a bunch of indestructible monsters who avoid being defeated or keep on reviving themselves until the protagonist pulls off that anime magic. I like to call these the final boss archetypes, since they're meant to be the last challenge of an arc with the biggest hurdle to overcome yet. However, when translated into the card game, Konami usually has to weaken or hinder their effects significantly, or make them incredibly hard to summon where it's not worth running them. Or sometimes they're great, but for this video, we want to focus on the terrible final boss archetypes that don't do too well when they make it into real life. Now, terrible might be an exaggeration, but basically they were anywhere from mediocre to bad compared to how unstoppable they were in the anime. And for final boss, we're considering any archetype used by a villain who was built up to be the main villain of an arc, like Pegasus, Merrick, Rex Goodwin, or Zone. These would not include major henchmen from the middle of an arc like the Paradox Brothers or the Dark Signers, despite how iconic some of their main monsters were. And joining me for this topic are the final bosses of real life, Sam from Dungeon Dive Bar.
I make up 1/3 of D-Boys.
And Professor Oats.
I make up another third of D-Boys.
Now, let's shuffle the top 10 terrible final boss archetypes in Yu-Gi-Oh! Number 10, Toons. Toons are a perfect number 10 since they're actually pretty solid with all of their support, but it takes a lot of resources to make them work. Still, they're pretty good resources. These are iconically the archetype from the first villain in the anime and a major villain in the manga, Pegasus, who loved cartoons, so he turned regular monsters into their Western cartoon-inspired counterparts using the magical book card Toon World. Besides being kooky and zany and what have you, Toons' bodies were distorted enough where they could just avoid all attacks or hide from destruction in the bindings of Toon World. To recreate this in the real-life card game, Konami made it where you could summon them if you controlled Toon World, and they could just attack directly to emulate how they bypass all monsters in the anime. But the trade-off was they could not attack the turn they were summoned, and you have to pay 500 life points to declare an attack. It also didn't help that you still had to tribute to summon the higher level ones, and most of them were level 7 or above.
Toon World, on top of costing life points, offered nothing. No protection. The monsters didn't even have inherent protection, and like in the anime, they couldn't be destroyed by battle except by a toon, or if they were restrained by Shadow Spell, or Attack Guidance Armor. They were supposed to be the strongest archetype because Pegasus made them and kept them for himself for the sole purpose of having the strongest deck. And then you learn that the real reason his deck was good was because he ran Relinquished.
I mean, Toons in the anime were a little bit overpowered because Pegasus was supposed to be a big deal, and they needed to figure out a way to translate Toons can dodge every attack because they're goofy is not something you can really put on a card. So they kind of redesigned it when they made it TCG cards, and I actually really like how Toons were designed. As in early Yu-Gi-Oh! That was trying to differentiate itself from Magic the Gathering. That's why we don't have keywords, and that's why our card text is so long. But having the parody archetype be based on Magic the Gathering, they have Summoning Sickness, the ability to attack directly is like the ability of a Hearthstone deck to go face or something. I think that flavoring is really cool.
It's called flying in Magic the Gathering. You can fly over your enemy's monsters.
As time went on, they slowly dropped the restrictions on the new Toons, like no longer needing Toon World up to be summoned, or not having to pay life points to attack. In addition, they added effects to new Toons to give them search power, plus more of them did not require tributes. They even got a better version of Toon World being Toon Kingdom, which gave Toons full destruction prevention and targeting prevention, just like what Toon World did in the anime. My favorite of the more recent Toon stuff is Comic Hand, which steals an opponent's monster and counts that monster as a Toon, so it kind of does what Toon World did in the anime by sucking up regular monsters and turning them into Toons. The main hindrance that even the modern Toons still have is they can't attack the turn that they're summoned, but they are able to attack directly with Toon Kingdom up, so you just have to rely on all their newer support to protect them enough so they can survive a turn, like Toon Terror being an Omni Negate, or Toon Briefcase shuffling a monster back into the deck, or just the general protection from Toon Kingdom.
And the funny thing is, Toon support is really good. They have 2 Rotas, 2 of them. They have Bookmark, which also protects cards later. They have Toon Table of Contents, which searches Bookmark. They have so much searching. They have Summons from Deck, Comic hand is Snatch Steal, which has been banned a lot. Toon Kingdom towers is your entire field forever, but just the monsters come out one at a time, do nothing, and sit there. Like, faster monsters in the deck's pretty cool.
If you can protect using all that, then get your Toon rollback going for a double attack, and you might have yourself a one-turn kill. The only newer Toon that doesn't have the attack restriction is Toon Blackluster Soldier, who can summon himself like a ritual summon by tributing Toons from the hand or field equal to or greater than its level. Plus, it has the Envoy of the Beginning effect for banishing. It's probably one of the most creatively designed Toons thus far.
They could easily retrain Manga Ryuran as Toon Ryuran and have it do anything.
No, it stays Toon Manga Ryuran.
But above all else, I always find it fun when we get new Toons for the designs alone. What monsters do you expect to get Toon forms next? I'm thinking Toon Flame Swordsman or Toon Battle Ox, though I wish they would step outside the original Duel Monsters era a bit like they did for the couple of GX cards. Imagine Toon Access Code Talker or Toon Nibiru. Ooh, Toon Max C. Nah, Toon Ash Blossom though, pretty good.
Give me my Toon Time Lord, Konami. Give me Toon Time Lord Metatron.
Toon Uriah, Lord of Silly Flames.
I would like to change my vote for the new Toon support card. I'd like to change it to Toon Mirror Force. It's just regular Mirror Force, but they put googly eyes on it.
Number 9, the Sacred Beasts. The Sacred Beasts are another good low entry for this video since they're not that terrible overall. They're a bit clunky and used to be hard to summon, but the tools they have now to get to their boss monsters are fantastic. I'm surprised how far they've come. They were cards capable of ultimate power in the anime that kinda just do things. Erase card art, restore your youth, but they were really just supposed to be big unstoppable monsters. They were shamelessly rip-offs of the Egyptian god cards down to having their card color match their monster color. Each is summoned by tributing 3 of a certain type of card. Araya uses 3 traps, Hamon uses 3 spells, and Raviel uses 3 fiend monsters. They also have other effects that destroy or summon more monsters, but it's really about their power aesthetic. When they were put in the actual card game, they were nearly unchanged. Konami mainly changed the types of spells and traps needed for Hamon and Araya to specifically continuous spells and traps. Since there was nothing connecting them as an archetype when they were released, they were only really usable in decks that follow their summoning methods, like putting Araya in a trap monster deck, or Hamon in a crystal beast deck, or Raviel in a fiend-focused deck. Because of that, they were very inefficient to summon since they require a lot of resources, and you couldn't search them for the most part. Maybe if you were lucky, you would draw them to have a nice big monster to summon, but that's pretty unreliable. Because of this, I never expected them to get support. They were lesser versions of the god cards in the public eye, so I just thought they would be a relic of the GX era forever. But then, Konami decided to give them support, like cool support. They got 3 support monsters: Dark Beckoning Beast, Chaos Summoning Beast, and Dark Summoning Beast. Beckoning searches any of the sacred beasts and gives you an extra normal summon of a 0-stat fiend, which all of these beasts are. Chaos Summoning lets you tribute it to summon any sacred beast from your hand, ignoring their summoning conditions, and you can banish it from the graveyard to search their field spell, Fallen Paradise, which gives the sacred beasts targeting and destruction protection. And finally, Dark Summoning lets you special summon any of the sacred beasts from your deck or hand, along with searching them if you banish it from the graveyard. Now that it's easier to get the sacred beasts in your hand or on the field, you can use their monster-specific support cards. Hamon has Cerulean Skyfire, and Araya has Hyper Blaze, both of which let them fulfill their effects more easily and protect them, along with letting them summon themselves with any face-down spells or traps, just like how the villain Kagemaru did in the anime. Raviel instead got a retrain, which supports regular Raviel, but it faked me out since I thought they were all going to get retrains because of this.
So the Raviel card was part of the signature attack series of cards. You know, Dark Magic Attack, Burst Stream of Destruction, etc., etc. Cerulean Skyfire was Hamon's attack name, and Uriah's Trap Destruction effect name is a trap card as well. Raviel was the monster effect monster, so he just had a monster card version.
Huh, that's actually clever. I like it now.
Cerulean Skyfire, as a rulings guy, I find it really interesting. To special summon Hamon, Lord of Striking Thunder, using its own procedure, you can use face-down spells, and then it negates the resolution of a spell trap. It's like, it's cool. I would be down to see stuff like like that. But the thing is, Cerulean Skyfire mentions all 3 sacred beasts and then only does something with Hamon. It feels like even support that mentions all 3 of them is only good with one of them, and none of them have enough support. I think with a few more cards, I'd be happy to play some of these.
Actually, I think they've gotten a few good combined synergy cards, like the one that starts it all, Opening of the Spirit Gates, based on the scene where they were unlocked in the anime, which searches any of the sacred beasts or their support monsters, and lets you special summon any of the support monsters, and gets you continuous spells from the graveyard. It can lead to doing so much with them. I love it. It's also a continuous spell for Hamon. They also have a fusion and a fusion retrain that summons the original fusion, but it's super gimmicky. The main fusion is indestructible by battle and has 0 attack points, but it gains 10,000 attack during your turn only, so it's a kill everything machine. This made sense as a threat in the anime when battle was the main way to destroy things, but it can still be destroyed by card effect and can still be negated in real life, which brings it back down to 0. If they really wanted it to make a splash, I would say just retrain it to have 10,000 attack as the stat line rather than an effect. And you know what? Let's make it unaffected by everything. Really reward those Sacred Beast players. Number 8. Time Lords. To be honest, I can't go too hard on Time Lords since they know what they are. They're not good played as an archetype, but they work on an individual level, where most of them are 0 stat level 10 monsters that can normal summon themselves without tribute on an empty field, and they can't be destroyed by battle or card effect. Each of their effects involves battling for no damage, and then after battle, they have various effects that either burn your opponent or clear their field, like cutting their life points in half or bouncing all of their back row or monsters to their hand. And finally, during your standby phase, they shuffle back into the deck to make room for another Time Lord to be summoned. They're good in stun decks since they're hard to destroy if your opponent doesn't have the right counter, but they're super gimmicky and their support cards are basically unsearchable. They do have one searcher in Time Maiden, but if you don't draw her, it's up to luck if you draw the Time Lord with the effect that you would need to counter your opponent. In the anime, however, they were used by the final villain of 5D's Zone with a hyphen after the Z, and they were a lot harder to take down.
Well, so the guy who used them only appeared in the original Japanese. 4Kids, with their final action, cut the last 17 episodes of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds, because all of the duels in it involved someone dying at the end, and there was no way to censor, someone being sucked into a black hole or exploding and falling down an infinite chasm.
First off, the anime generally used battle and card effects as the main form of destruction, so having that immunity was king. Then Zone had 3 traps, Empty Machine, Infinite Machine, and Infinite Light, in which you need 1 trap to activate another, starting with Empty Machine. Basically, by the time you get to Infinite Light, you can special summon Time Lords for free and pull the boss Time Lord Cephalon from the deck, who lets you special summon as many Time Lords as possible, and their attack is now 4,000.
Well, let's not even talk about the fact that the Time Lord boss monster is objective worst Time Lord.
Oh, this one's weird. Must be special summoned by having 10 or more monsters in your graveyard?
There are 10 other Time Lords.
In an archetype full of dudes that return themselves to the deck.
Yup, he is unusable in his own archetype.
Oh no.
In real life, you just get 1 extra Time Lord with his effect, but in the anime, you then get this army of massive indestructible monsters. That being said, any effect negation just makes a majority of them big useless 0 stat monsters with no protection. You can get around that limitation by getting Infinite Light on the field the same way Zone did in the anime, but instead of its crazy summoning effect, it mainly is meant to prevent your Time Lords from being targeted or shuffled back into the deck. It still doesn't protect them against non-targeting effects though, so I feel they really needed to make them completely unaffected to make this card useful. And even though I just downplayed the summoning effect, you can summon 1 Time Lord from your deck, hand, and graveyard each. That's pretty crazy on paper that you can get up to 3 Time Lords if you meet those requirements, ignoring their summoning conditions, which is really meant for getting out Cephalon easier, but seems like a lot of setup. In the end, Time Lords are good for the occasional stalling, but maybe not as the focal point of a deck. Number 7, Numeron. Numeron is the archetype used by the final boss of Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal, Don Thousand. He wrote and rewrote the history and memories of all the people that eventually became his minions, and he was the one who scattered the chaos-inducing number number monsters around the world. When you ultimately reach the originator of the numbers, you have to deal with the first 4 numbers, which are 4 indestructible by battle machine Xyz monsters. To summon them, well, that doesn't actually matter since he has a field spell that just bypasses that and summons all 4 from the extra deck, ignoring their summoning conditions, but to activate their effects, well, that also doesn't matter since the field spell lets them activate effects without detaching, so all you have to do is attack. They all have the same effect that doubles their attack after battling a monster, so they just keep battling to double their attack until the third one has 4,000 attack to hit over any monsters left, and the last one has 8,000 attack to wipe out the remaining life points. When these cards were printed, they were exactly the same as they were in the anime, since Zexal finished in 2014, but they weren't released until 2020, so they were kinda just at the normal power level of the game at the time. The typical Numeron strategy was to go second with these cards, pack the deck with board breakers like Feather Duster to deal with back row, and Kaijus or Lava Golem to get rid of monsters that have tricky effects. Next, use any field spell searchers to get the field spell you need to get out your 4 Xyz monsters, and then just attack into the safe monsters or the Kaijus to hope that you get that 1-turn kill. While this can definitely steal some wins if you draw good, one piece of effect negation or effect destruction and the strategy is dead. You can go into a backup plan like with their other boss monster that banishes everything or a link monster, but overall, the archetype is a one-trick pony that has a pretty good trick. Also, he has insane boss monsters, including a rank 13 guy with 100,000 attack points, but as you would expect, it's hard to get out in real life, and all Numeron decks really just stick with the main 4 guys. Though if you do get that boss monster out against me, I'll admit defeat.
He gains 100,000 attack points on your opponent's turn only.
I do like how large that number is. It's a really big number, and it does effectively mean it can't be destroyed by battle.
With no effect protection. But if you don't attack it, it's an automatic duel winner, and it can negate attacks. I think we also mentioned it on our top 10 ridiculous card names list.
Weird Xyz monsters, but it would have fit on the name list too.
Because this is his full original name. Chaos Imaginary Numbers 1000, Hollow Light God of Illusion, Numeronius Numeronia. It's a lot of words to say. This card cannot be destroyed by battle.
And the final boss is Boss Monster, made to order Mermaid Outfit Outfitter.
Number 6, Heraldic Beasts. Heraldic Beasts is a weird archetype for this list, since they just don't seem like they're strong enough to be boss monsters to me. Their playstyle in both the anime and real life was primarily swarming the field to go into rank 4 Xyz monsters, so a pretty standard style for the era. They got searchers, revivers, the works, so nothing notable that's different. They are based on animals from the heraldry of different countries, so I guess that could be considered a boss monster aesthetic. Though their boss monster from the anime, number 69 Heraldry Crest, had a true boss monster feel with its effect, negating all monsters on the field and copying their effects, essentially stealing them. That's pretty threatening when you consider this monster could have like 5 effects when it was done. For the real life card, they obviously couldn't do all that, so Konami nerfed it where it could only target one monster to copy its effect, and just until the end of the turn. Also, it was no longer a full board negate, and instead only negates other Xyz monsters, so that part of the effect may be irrelevant depending on what your opponent's playing. And just because someone's gotta mention it, yes, haha, the boss monster is number 69. This archetype was used by the villain of the first part of Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal, Tron. His role as the villain was weird since there was technically one guy ahead of him in this part, Dr. Faker, who was a guy that Tron also hated and had shades of gray morality to him, but I don't know, I think Tron and his archetype should be considered the final boss of the part. His sons were the other main duelists to beat. He was built up to be the biggest threat in the tournament. He even takes out the former antagonist and now just friendly rival Kaito. Like, Tron reveals literally everything about not being a bad guy right after he's beat. He plays it straight with the final boss motif until the very end.
So, the Heraldic Beast user, Vetrix in English, Tron in Japan, has a grudge against Dr. Faker because during an expedition where he was an adult man named Byron, he fell into a portal to the Barian world and gained evil magic.
Wait, are you saying only kids should be named Byron?
No, he was a normal human adult man and then he transformed into a weird child.
I know, you said it like it was a weird thing though, like he was an adult man named Byron, like come on. Byron's for babies. babies.
And so he swore vengeance on Dr. Faker, where Dr. Faker was to make a deal with devils and go, fix my son's horrible terminal disease. And they went, only if you try and destroy this other dimension. And he went, done. Cool. We're going to give the kid with the horrible disease superpowers that exacerbate his illness so that you can send garbage recycled from your city's garbage center as missiles to destroy the astral world. And he went, done. And didn't question any of what transpired.
Okay, so he plays the scrap archetype.
No, he plays garbage.
Oh, garbage lord.
I know we're not supposed to explain the joke, but saying he plays garbage is one of my favorite out-of-context lines you've said in a video. But yeah, Dr. Faker plays like 3 monsters and has no duels besides the one against Yuma. So because of that, we're giving Tron the honor of being called the final boss of the arc, and Heraldic Beasts gets the dishonor of being on this list. Don't worry, I'm sure they'll get support eventually. Number 5, the Winged Dragon of Ra. The Egyptian gods are the quintessential boss monsters of the original series. They're big, both physically and stat-wise, they're basically immune to everything, and they require more tributes than normal to summon, making them feel like a major deal. They were released as standalone big guys in real life that you could put in your deck, but they were not really good since they needed 3 monsters as tribute, and there were few ways to search them early on. Nowadays, there's a good amount of general support for them that let you search them or get more monsters on the field quickly to tribute for them, but since we're talking about the villain archetypes for this list, we have to talk about the Winged Dragon of Ra used by Merrick during Battle City. I guess it's more of a series than an archetype, but still, the support specifically Ra has gotten is impressive. Since Ra was the villain god card, it seemingly had more powers to pull out of its ass than the manga and anime. It could only be summoned with an ancient chant. It gains the attack of all monsters that were tributes for it. You could put all but one of your life points into its attack. It can destroy all monsters on the field, and it could be revived as an indestructible phoenix. Putting all that on a real life card is kinda cracked, so Konami nerfed it when they printed it. Now, it was only immune to effects when summoned. It could only get attacked by paying all but 100 of your life points and putting the rest into its attack, and you could pay 1000 life points to destroy one monster at a time, but you could do it multiple times in a turn, so that's actually pretty nice. However, if you want to give it attack points, you have to do it when it's summoned, so you can either choose to pay life points to give Ra attack, or to do the destruction effects. There's no middle ground with this version. Though as time went on, Konami gave Ra support that sort of rebuilds its manga/anime effects. First, it got its Sphere mode from the source material, which is a kaiju that tributes your opponent's monsters to give them an unresponsive Ra, similar to when Mai tried to summon Ra on her own, and eventually it comes back to you so you can summon the real Ra, and his stat line will be 4000 instead of making you pay life points to give him attack, so now you can have a big beater and do the destruction effect. Then for the other major Ra monster, you have its immortal phoenix form, which is something Ra could just turn into when revived from the graveyard in the anime. This card acts as the backup when Ra is sent to the graveyard, or if it's in your graveyard when Ra is sent there, you can special summon it and it's immune to all effects, and has 4000 attack points, and has Ra's destruction effect, giving it that true boss monster feel. However, it has to swap out with the Sphere mode at the end of the turn, since this form could only be on the field for one turn in the story. As you could guess, it's a lot of setup, but it's cool when you can pull it off. And besides the monsters, Ra got a whole bunch of other support that just makes everything quicker for it. Ancient Chant searches Ra and makes summoning it easier. Millennium Revolution dumps a Ra monster from your hand to the graveyard for a monster reborn, and then it lets you reenact Merrick's summoning of Ra with Reborn from the manga. Then we have Dark Spell Regeneration, which also summons Ra from the graveyard, ignoring its summoning conditions, and sends a monster your opponent controls to the graveyard. Blaze Cannon is a kill everything card that gives Ra even more attack points and destruction effects, and then we can tie it all together with the True Sun God, which searches all of these cards and sets up your Immortal Phoenix plays by sending it to the graveyard and sending a Ra you control to the graveyard so you can trigger its effect.
Here's the thing. I don't think Merrick's archetype was Egyptian gods. You could argue that Atem's archetype was Egyptian gods. He used all 3, he set it up, he summoned them. And Merrick kind of capstones the duel with Ra after everything else doesn't work. But his archetype is Stallburn. And he does it really efficiently for someone in the DM era. He summons Lava Golem, he plays Nightmare Wheel. Nightmare Wheel stops attacks and burns, Lava Golem burns. Metal Reflex Slime, Jam Breeding Machine Jan Defender, stops attacks, big defense.
Boganian.
lenient. He had a plan, and he was actually really efficient at setting it up. And all the stuff in the duel that made no sense, when he, like, fused with his metal reflex slime and made Egyptian god slime and then set up Jam Defender and Revival Jam to stop all attacks, they did such a good job of adapting that scene from the anime into Egyptian god slime.
That's right, I almost forgot. They printed Merrick's God Slime Staller as a real card, and it works as general Egyptian god support, but I mainly see it in raw decks.
Egyptian god slime special summons over the metal reflex slime to pretend to be the fusion. It's got the stats of 3/4 of Obelisk's attack, which is what the trap set up in the anime, and then Jam Defender keeping him alive is similar to the attack redirection that's on Egyptian god slime. They turned a scene from a show into like a coherent card that's not even bad in its own like little sphere. I think it's extremely cool. I think it's cooler than anything they've done with the god monsters, and honestly, if they're gonna do retrains of the Merrick stuff, try doing more of that. Do some jam stuff. I'm sorry, I don't need Slifer cards. I would be very down for jam cards though.
When Ra gets going, he can be good, but since it takes so many cards to rebuild his anime effects, he's a bit too gimmicky for the meta, but he's just fine if you want fun. Number 4, Earthbound Immortals. These were the big beatstick boss monsters from the Dark Signer arc of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds, and they follow how the Egyptian gods or sacred beasts were those one-off monsters that you drew at the climax of a duel for conflict. They had the universal effect that they could attack directly with their big attack stat, which is especially a threat with only 4,000 life points in a standard anime duel, and they could not be targeted for attacks. It was pretty hard to get rid of them. Each also had an effect that usually involves burn damage or clearing a part of your opponent's field. Their main limitation is they needed a field spell up to stay on the board, or else they're destroyed at the end of the turn and lose their effects. This was easy in the anime, since all writing duels involved field spells, so that limitation was really just there to show off the 5D's gimmick. You also can't have more than one Earthbound Immortal on the field at a time, but that was never a problem since each Dark Signer only had one. The leader of the Dark Signers, Rex Goodwin, gave one to each of his underlings, so they were never really designed to be a cohesive deck, just a one-of, but Konami tried.
The Earthbound Immortals have a place in the anime as being these big capstone monsters in each fight, but I might be one of the only people. I do not like the Dark Signer arc. I think the stuff before and after it in 5Ds was better, and I will mention why. Fight some Dark Signer. Oh, I'm using spiders or fortune ladies or something like that, and I'm doing my thing and it's cool. Oh, you've outed my monster. I'm gonna do phase 2 of the fight, which is my Dark Synchro. Can you out this? Well, I'm going to randomly put 2 dudes on the field and summon the Earthbound Immortal. And now you're fighting that. It was phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Archetype, unrelated Dark Synchro, unrelated big unattackable dude. And in the anime, when they were summoned, they killed every person in a 5-mile radius for some reason.
Unless you're Crow and hide in a refrigerator.
Yeah, fridges are extremely safe. Obviously, like, they were strong in the anime because they have big attack, they can't be attacked, they're immune to spell traps, and they just mass murder when they get summoned.
Each effect was basically like the anime when printed, only the Immortal gets destroyed immediately if there's no field spell. And even though most archetypes have field spells now, that makes the Immortals a brick if you draw them early before you get your field. Not to mention, a single piece of spell card removal takes down your field spell and your Immortal in one fell swoop, so all your resources to get them out there would be wasted. They also got some support spells and traps in their initial run, which were good, like giving them a Feather Duster or Monster Reincarnation, but they were kinda forgettable. Then they got a wave of support in 2019, which I thought was really cool. The main monster in question was Greater Line Walker, which is your searcher and makes your opponent's life points low enough for a one-turn attack kill. More importantly, they got their own field spell, which is something you think they should have if a field spell is so important for them. Earthbound Geoglyph, which has my favorite card effect design for them, where if you have a level 10 monster on the field and all the Immortals are level 10, the field can't be targeted or destroyed, giving it that built-in protection that the Immortal also needs. In addition, you can use a Synchro monster for a single tribute of them, and you can search an Earthbound Immortal spell or trap when a monster is Synchro summoned, going with how Rex played his Synchro Dragons in the anime, plus 5Ds is the Synchro anime. They got another wave of support in 2023, which effectively dissolved the Immortal part of the archetype and just made them the Earthbound archetype. Konami introduced the Earthbound Servants and Prisoners, some of which were in the Arc 5 anime, but these monsters were more just aesthetically related. Since these monsters were related to all Earthbound monsters, you could throw an immortal in there if you so desire, and they do have a few effects that support them like searching field spells, but if you're playing the Earthbound servants and prisoners, you really don't need to play the immortals anymore. It kinda shows that the best way to play the Earthbound immortals is to just play their friends. Number 3, Mech Lords. Mech Lords are machines that hate synchro summoning. They were used by the villains of the penultimate arc of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5D's The World Racing Grand Prix. It was a tournament arc whose main villains were sent from the future to stop synchro summoning from happening, since that ruins the future. I know it's Yu-Gi-Oh!, but even that sounds kinda silly on paper. The 3 androids that used Mech Lords throughout the arc combined into the final villain of the arc, Aporia, who uses the biggest of the Mech Lords. The best Mech Lord effects do everything in their power to stop synchro monsters from doing anything, whether it's negating their effects, or stealing them from the opponent, or just stopping their summon entirely. Gonna be honest though, I hate their strategy.
I love Mech Lords. They're so stupid. I love anti-archetypes as a concept because they are so specific. They are terrible as a result. They're right up there with Ally of Justice for terrible anti-archetypes coming out of the 5Ds era.
I am neutral on Mech Lords, and that's why we are all 3/3 of D-Boys.
That's right.
Okay, Mr. Top 10 List, I never hear you say you hate an archetype. I would like to hear more.
Okay, so I don't like that it's a full archetype dedicated to stopping one summoning method. Like, I get that synchro summoning was relevant to 5Ds, but when we have anti-summoning tech like Anti-Fusion Zone, it's just a single card rather than a full archetype, so it could work in a side deck. If I want to play this deck as an archetype, it's mostly useless if your opponent doesn't use synchro summoning. I know Konami wanted anime accuracy when they printed them, but I feel like they should have broadened the effects to include more monsters that are affected by the Mech Lords. Like, their field spell prevents Mech Lords from being targeted by synchro monsters. Why not just prevent them from being targeted by any monsters? They needlessly hinder themselves for the synchro hate.
I think Mr. Top 10 List hate monologue, it points out a little bit of a fallacy in Yu-Gi-Oh! And they do this a lot in the anime, but also people do this when playing the card game, which is just assuming cards are good at all times because they are a good card. If you look at what a Mech Lord is, something floats into a big-ish robot, and it is a change of heart sometimes. And like, Relinquished is a change of heart all the time. So you don't necessarily have to make it anti-synchro. I mean, the Mech Lord archetype that's not the boss monsters are kind of unique. They're machine monsters that get advantage when they destroy themselves. Machina. Oh, sorry, I've got such a cough. But they're dark machines, and they've got a boss monster that gets summoned if a face-up dark machine monster is destroyed. Desperado Barrel Dragon. And, you know, that's a really unique effect that hasn't really been seen. And maybe, if they wanted to have more stuff like that, they could have, like, a spell card. And when that spell card goes to the graveyard, you summon a big monster from deck. Gear Town. Oh, sorry, I'm gonna drink some water real quick.
You got some GX stuck in your throat there, bud.
I have Mech Lord hate stuck in my throat.
But MrTopTenList, you're ignoring the best part about Mech Lords. They were released with Xyz monsters. They were put in the TCG and OCG when Zayal hit. Synchro stopped being used for general purpose because Xyz came out and then the Mech Lord showed up. So they did actually have a retrain, Triskelion, which has an effect that you can just rip extra cards and equip it to it. And if it happens to be a synchro, it can attack 3 times.
On that note, I also like that the Mech Lord with Synchro Absorption in its name actually just targets any monster on the field because they were done with the gimmick at that point. Number 2, Destiny Board. It was hard to say if this archetype should make the list since, even though it belongs to the final villain of the original series, Yami Bakura, he doesn't use it in his final duel. That deck was more just a hodgepodge of fiend monsters. Though I'm sure one day we'll get a full archetype based around his ancient counterpart's final boss, Zork, with a retrain of Zoma the Spirit and the Diabound being support cards. But with that not existing yet, we'll go with his archetype that Konami did expand upon, Destiny Board. Are we bending our own rules here? Maybe, but Bakura is the final villain and he does play an archetype that's not good in real life, so he deserves an entry on this list.
I think they should go the extra mile and retrain all of Bakura's cards from back then. I think we should get an Earl of Demise retrain. I just really like Earl of Demise as a card. It's so stupid.
Bakura used the Destiny Board in his second duel with Yugi during the Battle City quarterfinals. It's a trap that summons a Ouija board, and at the end of your opponent's turn, you add a letter to the message of the board, with each letter being a specific card, until it spells death, or final in international releases, since blah blah blah, you couldn't say death if the kids were listening. Once it spells that 5-letter word, the opponent automatically loses the duel. Since it was the manga/anime, Bakura was able to stall it out to make it a close fight as those 5 turns passed, and Yugi had no back row removal to just get rid of the Ouija board. But in real life, Konami released the Destiny board with the same function as in the anime, so one piece of back row removal and poof, Destiny board is defeated. Plus you have to play the other 4 Spirit Message letter cards, which have no effect other than being Destiny board pieces, so you're entering with 4 bricks in the deck. It was not viable in 2004 when it came out. It sat unsupported for over a decade until they printed a vital card for it in 2016, Dark Sanctuary. This was a field spell Bakura used with the board in the anime, where it had a dark spirit that possessed Yugi's monsters to prevent them from attacking to stall. The real card emulates the ghost that's haunting the field by flipping a coin whenever the opponent declares an attack. Heads negates the attack and deals effect damage, allowing you to stall. More importantly, this card lets you summon a Spirit Message as a monster and it can't be targeted for attacks, and they are completely unaffected by all effects, making them easier to stick on the field. Later in 2019, they finished off the Destiny board support for now. We got Dark Spirit Mastery, which is the board searcher, or a searcher for a level 8 fiend, in reference to Bakura's ace monster Dark Necrofear, who was needed to activate the board in Dark Sanctuary in the manga. We also got Dark Spirit monsters that support level 8 fiends too, based on Bakura's other monsters. Finally, there's Sentence of Doom, which can get back your fiends from the graveyard or banished pile, and can send itself to the graveyard to cheat out an extra Spirit Message early. More importantly, it's based on the manga version of the Ouija board that showed Necrofear manning the board, which is just terrific art. Oh, and there's also Cursed Necrofear now, which destroys your opponent's cards equal to face-up spells and traps you control to work with the board.
Bakura had fiends, he had Dark Necrofear as kind of his boss fiend, and he had Destiny board, and bless Konami, they have done a lot of work trying to keep those relevant for his modern support. Dark Spirit of Malice and Banishment, which I like as cards, just bring back level 8 fiends a whole bunch. The field spell tries to do something else with the Spirit Messages, but if you're gonna bring it back to Destiny board, there is a flaw of you have to be winning and have them not mess with you for 5 consecutive turns, and Yu-Gi-Oh's just become too fast a game. If you're controlling the board for 5 turns, you could have won a little while ago. You could make access code and punch him or something like that.
Overall, the support is cool, but it requires you to play a lot of dead cards or cards that need other cards to work, so play at your own risk, and not just the risk that Necrofear's gonna get ya. For the top pick, we went with the archetype that just feels like the hardest to play despite being a power threat in the anime. Number 1, Arcana Force. This archetype was used by the Season 2 main villain of Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, Sartorius, a fortune teller under control by the Light of Destruction, so his archetype reflected his profession, being based on the major arcana of tarot cards used for predicting the future. To add to the motif, each monster could have one of 2 effects depending on if Sartorius revealed the card to be right side up or upside down. Right side up was usually the beneficial effect for the monster, while upside down was usually a negative effect for the user or beneficial effect for the opponent. Since it was the anime, Sartorius would always land on the beneficial effect or have the negative effect reversed, so the gimmick was really just there to add flavor to his playstyle. And yes, it was cool to see him bring a table to the duel or spin around a giant card with sound effects, but when bringing it into real life, you just created an archetype that had a built-in liability.
I really like the flavor of Arcana Force, not the cards, let me be clear, but the reason they had bad effects in the anime was so Sartorius could taunt people and make them think like they've won, then the bad effects don't happen, or they do, and it doesn't matter because he's already won. And he does like toying with people and playing mind games because he is really good. His introductory duel was that turn 0 satellite cannon kill, which that's still one of my favorite duels in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime, period.
The thing about the good effects for the non-boss Arcana Force monsters is they were pretty standard effects for monsters at the time of release, which was 2008, like gaining attack for a turn when a spell card is played, or counting as 2 tributes, so it's not like the archetype would have been busted if they just took away the gimmick and gave them their better effects. And these were okay effects for 2008, meaning they're pretty bad now. The world lets you skip your opponent's next turn, so that's still pretty cool. Alas, Konami went for anime accuracy when printing using them. Instead of rotating cards, their effects were determined by a coin flip. It was cool how Sartorius would still rotate them in Duel Links though. As you would guess, this is unreliable and a near impossible strategy to base anything around. They also have their field spell from the anime, Light Barrier, which lets you choose the Arcana Force effect, but you still have to flip a coin every turn for the field, and if it lands on tails, the field is negated for the turn, so you can't even rely on that. Their boss monsters, the Light and Dark Rulers, have the right idea by having either coin flip be a different type of positive effect, but still, you can't control that effect without the right cards.
I conceptually love Arcana Force. I love a good gamble deck, except the gamble is bad. There's only one good effect of the original Arcana Force, and that's for a very convoluted nonsense, the world lock. And even then, they knew they were bad when writing it because they released Light Barrier during the final Duel of Season 2. Sartorius played that card to make his effects work because, from the anime, Jaden's luck was better than Sartorius's and his dark magic prevented him from seeing the future. In the anime, random chance works because it's a script. In reality, you just lose.
There is actually a gamble duelist, which is Joey, with his graceful dice and his skull dice and his time wizard. Sartorius kind of plays himself like that at first, where there is random chance to his effects, but he has it all figured out. Everything's part of his plan, and that's kind of his style.
In the end, Arcana Force is just one of those archetypes that was left in the past, having no support since their release in 2008. Interestingly though, a few of the cards from the anime were never printed, like the Hanged Man or Strength. They were unremarkable cards in the anime, but maybe Konami is saving them for a rainy day, and they'll give them busted effects like they did with other anime cards they held off on releasing and revised the effects. Not to mention, some Arcana like the Hermit never appeared in Sartorius' deck as monsters, so there is some room to work with. More interestingly, Arcana Force got their first new printed card in 15 years in 2023 with the Devil, or the Fiend, which searches Light Barrier and has a pretty good negative effect where it destroys all monsters on the field. After a long delay, this one was printed after being in the anime, so perhaps that means new Arcana Force support is quietly approaching. It just seems strange that they released one new Arcana Force card and left. I'm convinced something is on the way. Maybe they'll get cards that force the good effects, or maybe they'll redo how the effects work overall, like letting you choose between the two effects, or having one effect work on your turn and the other one work on your opponent's.
I think it should be like the Dream Mirror archetype, where they can tag out negative card effects and positive versions of themselves, and put them on the opponent's field to punish them. Because when a card is upright to you, it's upside down to your opponent. I think if they had done that to play with a tarot card, it would have done better mechanically, especially because in the era it would have been released, it would have been when tribute summoning was still a thing, so you would have given your opponent free material, but they'd have had a negative effect prior to that.
Arcana Force just always felt like it was dead on arrival, but maybe it can be turned around someday. But for now, we'll just call it the top terrible final boss archetype in Yu-Gi-Oh!
You're less than nothing in the grand presence of destiny. You can't stop what's meant to be.
Now, what did you think? Were these boss archetypes lacking in the real-life card game, or were we too harsh on these champions? And what are some of your favorite final bosses in Yu-Gi-Oh, whether we discussed them or not? Let us know in the comments. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and we will see you in the next video.